The world's most powerful democracy does not negotiate. It does not persuade. It simply takes an ice-covered island, 58,000 people, no army of its own, and yet at the center of NATO, international law, and global stability. I'm Fareed Zakaria. And what you are about to hear is not a movie plot. It is a real conversation taking place inside the White House. Donald Trump has made one thing clear. Greenland matters to American power. So much so that every option, economic, political, even military, is being discussed. This is not just about territory. It is about what happens when raw power collides with the rules that have held the world together for decades. If you want to understand how fragile that order really is, stay with me. And if this kind of deep, clear analysis matters to you, consider subscribing. Because to understand what comes next, we first need to understand why Greenland became the target at all. Let's take a step back. So let's clarify the question at the heart of this story. How could the United States, bound by treaties, alliances, and international law, even contemplate taking Greenland? Because this is not one idea. It is three very different pathways, each with its own logic, risks, and consequences. The first is the most shocking: military action. Fast, decisive, technically feasible, and potentially catastrophic for NATO itself. The second is far quieter: purchase by agreement. Money, treaties, congressional votes, European approval. Legal on paper, but politically radioactive. And the third is the most subtle and arguably the most dangerous: an influence campaign designed to reshape Greenland's future from the inside. No invasion, no sale, just pressure, incentives, and time. What makes this moment so volatile is that none of these options exist in a vacuum. Each one tests a different pillar of the global order: law, alliance, or sovereignty. And before we judge which path is likely, we need to understand how Greenland ended up so exposed in the first place. That story begins long before Donald Trump. To understand why Greenland is even on the table today, we need to look backward into history, geography, and the slow logic of power. Greenland has always been vast, remote, and strategically awkward. World War II changed that. When Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, the United States moved into Greenland not to conquer it, but to protect Atlantic supply lines and build early warning systems. The Pituffik base, still operating today, was born from that moment. Since then, Greenland has lived in a gray zone, politically tied to Denmark, militarily dependent on others, geographically sitting between North America, Europe, and the Arctic. As the Arctic ice melts, this geography has transformed from isolation into leverage. New sea routes, missile trajectories, access to resources buried under ice. For Washington, Greenland is no longer peripheral. It is central to Arctic security. And for Denmark, defending the world's largest island with limited forces has always been a structural weakness, partially offset, but never erased by NATO. This imbalance, huge territory, tiny population, rising strategic value is not an accident. It is the condition that makes every option suddenly thinkable. And once that door opens, pressure begins to build. That pressure would soon find its first breaking point. The first breaking point is the one everyone fears, but few want to say out loud. Military action. On paper, it looks disturbingly simple. Greenland is enormous, yet fewer than 60,000 people live there. It has no army of its own. Its defense rests with Denmark, a country that cannot physically saturate such a vast Arctic territory. US defense analysts know this. So do America's allies. A rapid operation, airborne troops, naval support, control of key infrastructure could unfold in days, not weeks. The Pituffik base, already staffed by American personnel, could serve as a logistical spine. From there, troops could be flown in faster than any meaningful resistance could form. Some experts believe it could even be bloodless. Not because it is lawful, but because there would be little to fight back. And yet, this is where the real crisis begins. Because this would not just be an invasion of Greenland, it would be one NATO member attacking another. That single act would detonate the alliance from within. Article 5 would become meaningless. Trust, the true currency of NATO, would evaporate. Even in Washington, former officials warn this would violate international law and likely face resistance from Congress itself, which is why this option, while terrifyingly feasible, remains the nightmare scenario. And when brute force becomes too costly, power often searches for another door. So attention shifts from force to formality. Buying Greenland, at first glance, it sounds almost absurd. But history makes it less so. In 1946, President Harry Truman quietly explored paying Denmark the equivalent of $100 million in gold for the island. The idea failed, but it never disappeared. Today, officials inside the administration say purchase is the preferred option. Money instead of missiles, treaties instead of troops. Yet this path is riddled with obstacles. Greenland is not for sale. Neither Nuuk nor Copenhagen has left any ambiguity on that point. Even if they did, the process would be punishing. Congress would have to approve the funds. 2/3 of the US Senate would need to ratify a treaty. The European Union would have to sign off. And under international law, Greenlanders themselves would need to consent in the name of self-determination. This is not a real estate deal. It is a constitutional gauntlet. There is also a political reality Trump cannot ignore. Spending billions or trillions on an ice-covered island clashes directly with his America First promise. To many voters, it would look less like strategy and more like extravagance, which creates a dangerous paradox. The harder a legal purchase becomes, the more tempting shortcuts appear. And when both force and law fail to deliver results, power often turns to something quieter, something slower. That quieter path is the one least visible and most underestimated. An influence campaign. This option does not involve tanks or treaties. It involves time, money, intelligence, and patience. Opinion polls already show that many Greenlanders want independence from Denmark. They do not, however, want to become Americans. That gap between independence and alignment is where influence operates. US intelligence agencies, according to media reports, have increased their attention on Greenland's independence movement. The goal would not be annexation overnight. It would be something far more incremental. Encourage independence, support friendly political figures, offer short-term financial incentives, dangle long-term economic partnerships. Once Greenland stands alone, the logic changes. An independent Greenland could strike defense agreements with Washington, much like Palau, Micronesia, or the Marshall Islands have done. The US gains strategic access. Greenlanders gain economic guarantees and mobility. On paper, everyone wins. But there is a limit to this approach. Such partnerships do not grant ownership. They do not unlock full control over Greenland's mineral wealth. And they do not satisfy a president who thinks in terms of possession, not partnership. Most importantly, influence fails when the population resists. And today, no major political party in Greenland is campaigning to join the United States. Which brings us to the human reality behind all these strategies. Because beneath every geopolitical calculation are people who will live with the consequences. And that is where this story turns personal. Now let me speak directly to you. Because when great powers debate maps and minerals, it is easy to forget the human scale. Greenland is not empty space. It is home. 58,000 people live there not as statistics, but as families, workers, fishermen, students. Their lives are structured around a fragile Arctic economy, cultural identity, and a long memory of being decided for, not with. If Greenland were taken by force, money, or pressure, you would not see instant chaos. You would see something quieter. Uncertainty. Who controls the land beneath your feet? Who decides what is mined, what is built, what is militarized? Who speaks for you when global powers negotiate your future in distant capitals? Independence promises dignity. Annexation threatens erasure. And here is the uncomfortable truth. History shows that small populations rarely win when large powers decide they are strategically essential. If you believe global stability depends on rules, not just strength, if you believe people should choose their future, not inherit it from force, then this story matters to you. Because once the rights of Greenlanders are treated as negotiable, no small nation is truly secure. Stay with me, because what happens next does not stop at Greenland's shores. It ripples outward across alliances, markets, and the world itself. The consequences extend far beyond the Arctic ice. If Washington were to challenge Denmark or international norms, NATO itself would tremble. An alliance designed for collective defense could face its first existential crisis, one member acting unilaterally against another. Trust, the invisible glue of global security, would fracture. Europe would be forced to respond. The European Union, already wary of American unilateralism, would face the impossible choice: sanction, negotiate, or silently accept. China and Russia would watch closely, calculating how to exploit cracks in Western cohesion. Suddenly, a remote ice island becomes a fulcrum for global strategy. Markets would feel the ripple. Insurance, shipping, energy, and minerals, all linked to Arctic stability, would spike in uncertainty. Even nations with no direct Arctic interests would be affected. Greenland, small in population, enormous in consequence, illustrates a broader truth. In a hyper-connected world, a single bold decision by a powerful country can destabilize far-flung regions, and yet the future is not preordained. How the story unfolds depends on choices that have yet to be made and on the interplay between power, law, and human will. Next, we will explore 3 possible futures, from the optimistic to the catastrophic, and what they reveal about global order itself. Let's look ahead. 3 possible futures for Greenland, the United States, and the world. First, the optimistic scenario. Greenland asserts independence peacefully. The US becomes a strategic partner without coercion. NATO holds, alliances remain intact, and international law is respected. Resources are developed responsibly, populations benefit, and global trust endures. A case where diplomacy, patience, and influence, not force, prevail. Second, the middle scenario. Negotiations stall. Greenlanders resist economic or political pressure. Trump or his successors attempt more aggressive influence, bordering on intimidation. Alliances are strained, markets wobble, international norms are tested. No invasion occurs, but tensions persist, leaving the Arctic a zone of uncertainty. Third, the catastrophic scenario. Military or unilateral actions ignite a crisis. One NATO member acts against another. Trust collapses, Arctic militarization accelerates. Global powers, Russia, China, Europe, respond with countermeasures. A small population becomes the epicenter of a crisis that shakes decades of global order. Rules are broken, and the consequences could last generations. The lesson is clear. Greenland is more than an island. It is a mirror showing how power, law, and human choice intersect. Every decision reverberates far beyond its icy shores. And as we move toward the conclusion, we will consider what insight this gives us, not just about Greenland, but about the fragile architecture of our world. Here is the conclusion, the final insight, and the call to action. Greenland is not simply a frozen landmass. It is a test of our global system, a lens through which we see the tension between power and principle. The choices of a single nation, whether to respect law, alliances, and the rights of a small population, echo across continents. They reveal the fragility of trust, the limits of influence, and the moral weight of decisions made in distant capitals. For you, the viewer, The lesson is unmistakable. The world's stability is not guaranteed. It relies on vigilance, understanding, and the courage to hold power accountable. If you want to truly understand the forces shaping our future, to see the hidden levers of strategy, and to grasp the consequences of action and inaction, subscribe and follow this journey with me. Because Greenland is just the beginning. The questions it raises will define the next decades of geopolitics, alliances, and the rules that bind nations together or tear them apart. And remember, knowledge is not passive. Understanding is the first step toward shaping a world where power serves rather than destroys order. This is Fareed Zakaria, and this is the story of Greenland, a small island with consequences too large to ignore.